My own daughter stood at the microphone, smiled for the cameras, and called me the clan disgrace at my grandson's engagement gala. My chest burned, but I steadied myself years of sacrifice, reminding me that silence can be stronger than anger. Instead of storming out, I sat straighter, letting their cruelty expose itself while I quietly gathered proof. Little did they know this was only the beginning of a reckoning that would shake our family name. Before I continue the story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. The Lancaster Hotel in downtown Houston gleamed with the kind of polished grandeur that always made me pause before stepping inside. Chandeliers glowed like golden constellations above marble floors, catching the swirl of satin gowns and the crisp cut of tuxedos. A long red runner led into the ballroom, and the sound of a string quartet spilled into the lobby. I clutched the strap of my evening bag a little tighter. This was my grandson's engagement gala. Dorian, the boy I once cradled on my lap while he built toy castles with wooden blocks, now a man stepping into a new life with his bride-to-be Isolde. Pride stirred in me, but so did a knot of unease. Inside the ballroom, banquet tables stretched in elegant rows, each covered in ivory linen and lit with crystal candelabras. Waiters floated by with trays of champagne. I breathed in the fragrance of roses, lilacs, and something faintly metallic like polished silver. I spotted Dorian in his tailored navy suit standing tall at the front of the room beside Isolde in her pale gown. My heart softened at the sight he had grown into a man of such quiet confidence. Yet beneath that warmth, a shadow pressed against my chest. I was not sure why, but I knew tonight would test me. An usher in a black vest approached, glancing at the list in his hand. "Mrs. Claudine?" he asked. I nodded. His smile was polite, rehearsed. He led me past the rows of tables where family usually sat together down toward the far side of the room. I followed each step heavy until he stopped at a small round table, tucked beside the wall, not far from the double doors to the restrooms. My breath caught. "This will be your seat," he said softly, placing a menu before me. Around me, the laughter of well-dressed guests rose and fell while the fragrance of gardenias mingled with the faint, unwelcome scent of disinfectant that drifted each time the restroom door swung open. I glanced toward the family table at the front grand and perfectly lit where Selene, my daughter, sat with Vera, the groom's future mother-in-law. They were laughing together as though the night belonged only to them. I lifted my eyes to Selene's, but she looked away quickly, her chin high, a signal as sharp as a blade. I forced my lips into a faint smile, folding my hands in my lap. Silence was safer. On the table before me lay a neat row of place cards. My eyes found mine and my throat tightened. The name was printed wrong, my surname shortened, stripped of its dignity. No Mrs. No recognition of who I was. Just a clipped word, almost unfamiliar, as if I were a distant cousin, or perhaps a stranger who had slipped past the guest list. A heat spread across my cheeks, but I stayed still. Around me, guests glanced curiously. I caught whispers. Is she part of the family? Maybe a distant relation. I straightened my shoulders. If I protested, I would look desperate. Better to observe. From across the room, I saw Selene lean toward Vera, her lips curved into a smirk. She whispered something, and they both laughed, tilting their glasses together in a quiet toast. My fingers brushed the edge of the name card, its sharp corner digging into my skin. I remembered other family gatherings, birthdays, Thanksgivings, the Christmas dinners when I carved the turkey at the head of the table. My place then was central, expected, respected. The contrast tonight stung like vinegar in a wound. I thought of speaking up, of asking the usher to check again. But then I saw Selene glance my way once more, her smile daring me to rise. I remained still. My silence was not surrender. It was a choice, a wall that kept me from unraveling in front of strangers. Instead, I sipped from the glass of water set before me, tasting the faint chill of ice against my lips. I told myself, endure now, act later. The music swelled and voices rose as another group entered the ballroom. I pressed my palm against the tablecloth, smoothing its crease, pretending calm. Inside, a quiet storm built. I had been written out before the night even began, pushed to the margins of my own family's celebration. But I knew how to wait. I had learned across decades of sacrifice that silence held long enough could weigh more than words. I was present, I thought, staring at the misprinted card, yet already erased. My chest rose and fell slowly. I had no intention of breaking, not tonight. The evening pressed on. Waiters circled with hors d'oeuvres, their trays heavy with shrimp cocktails and stuffed mushrooms. I declined with a polite shake of my head. Around me, conversations flourished. A woman at my table asked where I was from as if I were a guest passing through. I smiled gently, but I did not answer in detail. Let them wonder. I would not explain myself to people who saw me as invisible. I kept my gaze steady on Dorian. He was laughing with Isolde, his hand resting lightly on hers. That sight anchored me. Whatever humiliation Selene engineered, I would not allow it to ruin the pride I carried for my grandson. Still, I could not ignore the sting. A mother relegated to a back table, her name diminished, while her daughter orchestrated the spectacle, as though family history could be rewritten by decorations and seating charts. I drew in a breath and sat straighter. Shoulders squared my heart, whispering its own vow. This was only the beginning, but I would not bow. And then I heard the first whisper that made my stomach tighten. It was Selene's voice that I heard first, sharp and low, carrying through the velvet hum of the ballroom, like the slice of a blade under silk. "Look at her gown," she whispered, but loud enough for those leaning in to hear, straight out of a clearance rack. I felt the words pierce me, before the meaning even settled. The fabric I wore was not new, but it was carefully chosen, a deep emerald dress I had kept pressed for years, one I once wore to an architectural gala, when I still co-owned the firm with Daniel. Back then, people complimented it. Tonight, it was treated like a costume. I turned my head slightly and caught Vera's eyes. She sat just behind Selene, her lips pulling into a discreet smile, as if they were sharing a private joke. She tapped her manicured nails lightly on her glass, a silent rhythm of agreement. The knot inside my chest pulled tighter. I held my breath, forcing my shoulders not to slump, forcing my eyes to remain calm. The laughter came next, quiet, clipped, deliberate. Not a loud burst, but a ripple that traveled down a row of women at the adjacent table. It was the kind of laugh that pretends to be harmless, but cuts deeper than a shouted insult. One guest, a woman no older than 40, turned her face toward me briefly. She didn't laugh. Instead, her brows furrowed in a way that stung more than the whisper itself. Pity. The kind of pity people reserve for someone who has lost their place. I could read it instantly. She saw me not as a mother, not as a grandmother at her grandson's engagement, but as an oddity someone misplaced in her own family's celebration. I sipped from my water glass, though I wasn't thirsty. It gave my hands something to do. I wanted to turn to defend myself, to tell Selene that I had worn this gown when she was still a child, clinging to my hand, that I had walked into rooms full of executives in it and stood tall. But words spoken in anger would have turned me into what they already believed, a bitter, aging woman, desperate for attention. So I remained silent. I let the sting settle deep, where it would not be seen, only felt. Movement flickered at the corner of my vision. A young man, maybe in his 20s, angled his phone discreetly toward Selene and Vera. He had the sly grin of someone who believed he was catching gossip worthy of a post later. My stomach churned. It wasn't just my humiliation anymore. It was something that might outlive the evening, replayed and whispered about by people who had no idea who I was or what I had given up for this family. A dress mocked at a table could be forgotten by midnight, but on a screen in a message thread it could linger. I felt the humiliation not only as a woman, but as a mother. If that clip ever made its way beyond this ballroom, my place in this family would be cemented as a punchline. My grandson's engagement forever shadowed by a whisper. The thought twisted something inside me, not rage, not yet, but a deeper kind of grief. I remembered another gala 30 years ago. The firm had just landed its first big government contract. Daniel and I walked into a hall not much different than this one, chandeliers, glowing music, flowing voices eager. I wore this same dress then. Back then, people noticed me. They asked my opinion. They treated me as if I belonged at the center of the table. That memory clashed so violently with tonight's reality that for a moment I wondered if I had misstepped through time into a world where I no longer carried weight. To them, I was no longer Claudine Morel, co-founder of an architecture firm, mother who raised a daughter through nights of fever and fear. Tonight I was merely the woman in the wrong seat, in the wrong gown, with the wrong name tag. I pressed my palm against the tablecloth, grounding myself. I thought of Daniel, long gone now, and how he used to whisper, "Let them talk, Claudine. Silence can be sharper than words." I breathed that in a reminder that not every battle is won by swinging back. Sometimes restraint plants its own kind of seed. The whispers eventually softened, drifting into other conversations. But the shift in the room was undeniable. A few guests glanced at me now, and then their looks carrying more distance than warmth. I wasn't included. I wasn't celebrated. I was tolerated like a distant cousin who had slipped past the door. I folded my hands in my lap and straightened my spine. I told myself not to leave, not yet. My grandson deserved my presence, even if others wanted me erased. It wasn't just the seat or the name tag anymore, I thought, staring at the glowing rim of the champagne flutes lining the table. It was my very presence they wanted erased. The host lifted his glass for the first toast, the golden light catching the liquid as if it were fire and crystal. I braced myself, because I knew the cut would come deeper. The host tapped a spoon gently against his glass, the soft chime rising above the murmur of voices. He smiled toward the crowd, his words, welcoming everyone to the evening's first round of toasts. My heart beat a little faster. I had not been promised a place in this program, but some guests turned in my direction, their eyes soft with expectation. A grandmother's voice at her grandson's engagement, it was customary, almost inevitable. I straightened my shoulders, fingertips brushing the cool surface of my champagne glass. My mouth was dry, but my resolve steady. I wanted only to offer a blessing, a few gentle words. But just as the host gestured toward me, a sharp movement caught the edge of my vision. Celine, my daughter, rose abruptly from her chair. Her sequined gown shimmered beneath the chandeliers as if demanding all the light in the room. She placed one manicured hand on the host's arm, the other reaching for the microphone. "I'll give the official family toast," she said, her voice ringing with authority that needed no invitation. She barely glanced at me, but the look carried dismissal as clear as a slap. The host hesitated, glancing between us, then surrendered the microphone. I gripped my glass more tightly, feeling the stem press into my palm. The champagne trembled at the rim, threatening to spill. I lowered my gaze to hide the storm gathering in my eyes. I would not grant her the satisfaction of seeing me falter. Celine lifted the microphone with practiced ease, flashing the smile she reserved for stages and cameras. Tonight, she began her tone. "Syrupy, we celebrate the strength of our family, the unity that defines our clan." Guests nodded, some applauding softly. She paused, scanning the room, basking in admiration. Then came the turn. Her smile, sharpened eyes, glinting as they landed on me. "Of course, every clan has its pillars," she continued, "and every clan has its disgrace." The word fell like a hammer. Gasps broke the surface of polite silence, rippling through the tables. My breath caught in my chest. She had said it before strangers, before in-laws, before my own grandson. My daughter had named me not as a mother, not as a grandmother, but as the disgrace of the clan. I saw Vera Isolda's mother press her lips into a satisfied smirk. The two women shared a conspiratorial glance that made my stomach twist. My humiliation was their entertainment. Heat surged in my cheeks, but I sat still, my eyes fixed on the rim of my glass, as though the reflection of the golden liquid might anchor me. Memories flashed nights spent building a firm with my late husband, years guiding Celine through school sacrifices made quietly. Yet all that history was erased in one sentence, rewritten by the very child I had raised. I wanted to scream. Instead, I let the silence swell around me. My silence was deliberate, a shield, a protest sharper than any outburst. I steadied my breath, my back straight as marble. If she expected me to crumble, she would be disappointed. Guests shifted uneasily, some lowering their eyes, others stealing glances at me, waiting for a reaction. I gave none. At last, when Celine finished her triumphant speech and lifted her glass high, I lifted mine too. My hand was steady now. I brought the champagne to my lips and took a slow sip. The bubbles stung my throat, but I swallowed them without flinching. Humiliation is loud, I thought, but silence can be louder. When the toast ended, I rose quietly, intent on leaving the table, reclaiming a fragment of dignity in retreat. But as I turned, a hand blocked my path. And when I stood to leave, a hand blocked my path. It was Vera's hand, soft in its glove, yet hard in intention, that slid between me and the aisle. She stood there as if nothing in the world were amiss, her lips stretched in a wide hostess-like smile for the room, but her eyes told me plainly that I would not pass. "Surely you'll stay for the family portion." She murmured her words, honeyed and sharp, all at once. Her gesture was small, almost imperceptible to anyone not watching closely, but its meaning was absolute. Around us, I felt the ballroom lean in. Guests looked on as though some subtle pageant were unfolding under the chandeliers. I gave her the smallest nod, the nod of someone who understood wars could be fought without raised voices. My breath steadied in my chest. If she wished to cage me, I would not rattle the bars for her pleasure. I lowered my hand to my side and carried myself as if the interruption were nothing at all. Yet inside, every muscle tightened as though bracing against a storm. The chandeliers shifted, and for one punishing moment, the ballroom spotlight held on me. I had risen only to walk away, yet suddenly I stood lit as if I were meant to deliver a speech. The light burned against my face and shoulders, turning me into unwilling theater. My skin prickled beneath its heat. I lowered my gaze, letting my eyes trace the veining of the marble beneath my heels. It was a habit I had carried from my working years. When words failed, focus on lines that would never lie. Those veins of stone reminded me of blueprints of structures that could withstand centuries. I found my calm there, the calm of a builder. When at last the spotlight slid away to its rightful place, I remained motionless. No stumble, no flinch, no sign that I had been pinned like a moth. The discipline of silence once again saved me from giving them the satisfaction of a scene. I made another attempt at freedom this time, aiming straight for the double doors. My shoes whispered across the marble, my handbag pressed close at my side. I told myself one step, then another, keep steady, do not show haste. My fingers had just brushed the brass handle when a suited security guard stepped into my path. His posture was professional, his voice polite, yet firm. "Ma'am, may I rescan your invitation?" His eyes avoided mine as if he were ashamed of the order he had been given. From across the room, I caught the faintest motion of Vera's head, the signal that this interruption was no mistake. My phone was already in my hand. I brought up the QR code steady, though my heart hammered in my ribs. The scanner beeped green at once. No problem. No issue. The guard nodded quickly, stepping aside. But the damage had already been done. A delay meant eyes turned toward me, whispers trailing in my wake, Celine looking away with theatrical innocence. I turned, pivoting deliberately, and walked back into the crowd. If I left now, the story would be written without me. I refused to surrender that. A waiter approached silver tray gleaming with crystal flutes of champagne. For a fleeting moment, it felt like grace. He smiled politely, held the tray low enough for me to choose. I reached for a glass, its cool surface settling against my fingers, bubbles sparkling within. But before I could raise it to my lips, another waiter rushed forward, bent close, and whispered in a voice too loud to hide VIP only, ma'am. The flute was plucked from my hand before I had even tasted it. My arm lingered in midair, frozen in absurdity, before I slowly lowered it. I smoothed the front of my dress as though that had been my intent all along. A pebble added to the heap of slights already laid upon me. I said nothing, because words were the weapon they wanted. I searched again for a place nearer to family. There was a table with 3 empty seats close enough to see the stage clearly. I approached it with measured steps, thinking perhaps dignity might still find a corner. But just as I reached for the chair, a woman with a headset rushed between me and the table. Reserved, she announced curtly, already turning her attention elsewhere. The dismissal struck like a slap. Across the table, Cellini's gaze slid over me as if I were transparent glass, nothing to register, nothing to acknowledge. I whispered, "Of course," and turned back toward the shadows carrying the weight of erasure. Southern courtesy filled the air like perfume, disguising its sting. I heard Vera nearby, her voice lilting with sugar. "Bless your heart," she said to another guest, though her eyes darted toward me as the phrase landed. It was not kindness. It was the oldest trick in the Southern handbook, weaponized politeness. I noted every detail of the room exit's cameras tucked high the queue of slides ready to play. I was a builder once, and builders notice. Cruelty disguised as etiquette was still cruelty, and I would not forget the roles each of them played tonight. And then through the fog of humiliation came the flicker. My grandson's eyes. Dorian caught mine across the ballroom. He held my gaze longer than anyone dared, not a smile, but something steadier. Isolde, seated at his side, gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Stay. The word was silent, yet I heard it as clearly as if she had whispered. My spine straightened once more. I lowered myself into a chair at the farthest edge of the room, no throne but a place nonetheless. If I left, their story would close without witness. If I remained, truth might yet find its door. The music dimmed, then chatter fading under the shift of attention. From the back of the ballroom, a man's voice rose low, deliberate and certain. A question rolled forward, and with it every head in the room turned. The voice rose from the back of the ballroom, steady and deliberate, cutting clean through the chatter like a blade through fabric. Conversations died mid-sentence. The string quartet faltered, and even the clinking of silverware seemed to pause. I turned instinctively, my pulse quickening before my mind could name the sound, and there he was, Arthur. Time collapsed. I had not seen him in more than 20 years, yet I knew him at once. His hair was white now, swept back his shoulders, slightly stooped from age, but his presence filled the Lancaster ballroom like a gust of cold wind. He walked with a measured pace, polished shoes striking the marble floor, and in his hand he held a folded newspaper. It trembled not from weakness, but from the weight of what it carried. For a moment I forgot to breathe. My past and my present collided under the chandeliers. Memories of boardrooms and late nights rushed forward, Arthur leaning over blueprints, me balancing ledgers, both of us fighting tooth and nail to keep our company alive. That paper in his hand had once meant survival. Now it promised something else, truth. The guests turned to watch him, their sequined gowns and black tuxedos shifting like a tide. Cellini stiffened her knuckles, tightening around her glass. Her smile stretched too thin. She had not planned for him. Arthur reached the center of the ballroom, cleared his throat, and unfolded the paper with deliberate care. Its edges were yellowed fragile, but the headline still shouted in bold black letters, "Morley Architect Saves City Project Community Jobs Secured." My name written plain for all to see. Gasps rippled down the long banquet tables. Strangers, whispered guests craned their necks, and I felt something unfurl inside me that had been caged for too long. My back straightened, my chin lifted. For the first time all evening, I no longer felt small. Selena laughed. It was quick, brittle, the sound of glass underfoot. "Oh, Arthur," she said, voice pitched to Carrie, always the dramatist. But her eyes betrayed her. They darted, restless, unsettled. She could not laugh ink off a page. Vera leaned closer to her, whispering, but even her painted composure faltered. Arthur's arrival had shifted the room, and everyone knew it. The host stumbled forward, flushed his cue cards trembling in his hand. "Thank you, Arthur, for that. Remarkable reminder." He coughed, tugging at his collar. I must offer an apology. Mrs. Morley's name was regrettably left off the official program. His gaze flicked to Celine, then quickly away. I was informed it was due to updated family requests. The word family cracked the air open. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Guests turned their heads, whispers hissing. Updated requests, one said. By whom, another asked. Eyes shifted toward Celine, suspicion sharpening. Celine's jaw clenched. Vera's smile stiffened but held. I lifted my water glass. Not champagne, never champagne for me tonight, and took a slow sip. My silence pressed heavier than any denial could. Arthur's voice rang out again, steady and sure. "Do not mistake this for nostalgia," he said, holding the paper aloft. "This is record. This is fact." When our firm stood days from collapse, it was Claudine who saved it. She negotiated contracts others called impossible. She kept workers paid when banks turned their backs. She fought for our reputation when the city council threatened to walk. Without her, none of what you see here, none of these buildings, none of this family's standing would exist. He turned then, his eyes finding mine, and for the first time that evening, I felt seen. The guests clapped, hesitant at first, then louder, a wave of reluctant acknowledgement sweeping the hall. Some clapped because they remembered some, because they feared being judged if they did not. But it was sound, and it filled the room, and it landed on Celine's shoulders like a sentence. She paled, her lips pressed into a line so tight they nearly disappeared. Vera shifted in her seat, her eyes darting everywhere but mine. Dorian, my grandson, watched silently, jaw tight, and I thought I saw something flicker. Pride, maybe shame, maybe both. I did not rise to claim the moment. I did not wave or smile or bow my head. I sat breathing slow and deep, remembering all the nights I had worked in silence, all the sacrifices left unspoken. Vindication did not roar. It whispered. Tonight it whispered through yellowed paper, through Arthur's unshaken voice, through the applause that Selene could not stop. I lowered my glass, smoothing my dress over my lap. My thoughts anchored themselves like stones. Vindication is not loud. Sometimes it is a folded paper in the right hand, but as the clapping faded, I saw it, the flicker in Selene's eyes, the sharp tilt of Vera's head. The night was not over. They would not surrender easily, and neither would I. But Selene wasn't finished, and neither was Vera. Applause thinned into murmurs, then into the small, hungry quiet of a ballroom that wanted a fresh story to chew. From my table by the wall, I watched Selene steer Vera toward the floral arch, as if they were admiring roses. Their heads tipped together, their shoulders closed in. That posture wasn't about petals. It was arithmetic, who to add, who to subtract, and how to divide the room so no one would notice the math. Two bridesmaids drifted past in chiffon and perfume. Is that her mother, one asked, not lowering her voice. They left her out of the program on purpose. Purpose slid under my skin like a needle. Rumor had found feet and was jogging laps. A small warmth, fragile and guilty, rose in my chest. Humiliation was shifting, not gone, but no longer mine alone to carry. Arthur sat down beside me as if he had always been there. The newspaper lay folded on the linen like a truce flag. "Claudine," he said quietly, "what your daughter did to the program is only the surface." He glanced toward the stage. Her catering emails go through a shell account. Deposits tonight didn't come from PR retainers. The look he gave me was the one I remembered from audits and bad quarters. If she's rewriting credit in public, she may be moving numbers in private. My napkin had twisted into a rope in my hands. "Control," I said. He nodded once. "It isn't you she's fighting. It's anyone who threatens the story where she is savior." I breathed, loosened the cloth, and set it beside the plate. There would be time to follow numbers. Tonight, I would follow faces. An event brochure lay half-tucked beneath a clutch on the chair behind me. I slid it free and smoothed its crease. The paper was heavy, embossed with initials. I read down the family acknowledgments I had avoided earlier. Under grandmother, my name had been scored out with a ballpoint pen, the pressure denting the page. No typo, no oversight, a decision. I folded the program twice and slipped it into my bag, another quiet piece of truth. The quartet moved into Sinatra to calm the air. It only made the whispers sound crisp. She erased her own mother. Who does that image is everything with Celine? The talk kept circling back to my daughter like birds discovering a shiny thing, fascinated and uneasy. I didn't push it. I let gravity do its work. Dorian stood near the dessert table, hands in his pockets, jaw set too tight. Isolde touched his sleeve. Both looked my way, and in their careful faces, I found my anchor. Not pride. Them. If I walked out Selena's word, disgrace would harden like plaster over the night. If I stayed, the story might keep writing. "If you need me to speak again, I will," Arthur murmured. "Choose the moment. They're hunting for a misstep. I won't give them one," I said. Our old cadence returned, plan and patience. He patted the table and rose with the kind of small bow Texas men still give their elders. I took stock. Exits, lighting truss. The photographer moving like a chess piece along the parquet's edge. Celine and Vera reappeared at the steps, elegance arranged and eyes bright with calculation. Celine adjusted the cuff of her blazer-style dress, then dusted a petal from Vera's shoulder, the easy intimacy of co-conspirators who know their next beat. Band changed keys. Couples floated to the floor. A planner hustled by with a headset and a clipboard bristling with sticky notes. 2 minutes, she whispered into her mic, then smiled at me the way people smile at a stranger they hope won't startle the horses. Talk kept returning to Celine. She told the host to change the lineup. Vera pays with clout. Celine pays with credit. Did you see security stop the mother? Each phrase was a small brick in a rising wall. I folded my hands and let the wall build itself. For a breath, the room softened at the edges, and memory walked in late nights at the architecture office. The hum of the AC, the drafting lamp's halo, the relief of making payroll by a hair. Sliding grocery money under Selene's door when she was 20 and furious rent due and pride thinner than the check. Her first press release, how her voice trembled with joy. I have always wanted her to win. I still do. But not like this. The house lights dimmed a shade. From the booth, a technician pointed to the stage. Selene lifted her chin. A practiced half-smile lacquered over her face. Vera's bracelets chimed as she squeezed my daughter's hand. I could almost hear the script they had polished in the corner, a gracious correction, a reframing, a rescue of image. They would try to bury Arthur's paper and plant a new headline. I inhaled to 4, exhaled to 6. I set my handbag at my feet, the brochure inside with its gouged line, quiet as a match that might yet find a stone. I wasn't going to burn anything tonight, not yet, but I would not leave unarmed. The band swelled. As the cord hung, Celine stepped to the microphone with the authority of a news anchor. Her gaze swept the room and caught me still upright, unmoved. Vera shifted a half-step behind her. The MC raised his hand to invite the next dance, then hesitated when Selene's fingers grazed the mic. The pause traveled outward in ring servers, balanced trays in midair. Couples' slowed whispers held their breath, as if making room for whatever came next. Their plan, sharpened in the corner, had reached the lip of its stage. The band struck up a waltz, and Selena reached for the microphone again. Selena lifted the microphone as if it had always belonged in her hand. Her smile lacquered her voice, warm enough to melt butter. Family, she began, is about resilience, about shining even when shadows linger. She didn't look at me, not directly, but the word shadows curled in the air like smoke that knew my name. Vera stood just behind her bracelets, chiming softly a metronome for control. A polite laugh sprinkled the room. Selene praised the caterers, the florist, the couple's bright future, then added, "We rise when we refuse to be dragged backward by outdated stories." The chandeliers glittered. The band held a resting note. I sat very straight, feeling every eye measure me against her velvet line about the past. In Houston, we dress our knives in manners. Selene had learned that lesson well. Tonight she wielded it like a pro, and the cut drew no blood you could see. I smoothed the skirt of my navy dress, the one I'd chosen, because it outlasted trends and moods, and let my breathing settle. The room smelled of gardenias and expectation. The floor hummed underfoot like a held breath. Applause arrived on cue, thin at first, then obliging. Some guests clapped with the relief of people who prefer smooth surfaces to honest floors. Across from me, a woman in a green shawl shifted her chair and gave me the smallest nod, the kind a stranger offers when she recognizes a private bruise. Another man tapped his phone, pretending to check messages, while his eyes stayed on my face. Voices rode the edges of the band's soft vamp. "Resilience," someone repeated, tasting the word like a mint. Despite the shadows, someone else murmured. I held my glass of water as if it were more fragile than crystal, because one tremor would turn me into the spectacle they kept fishing for. Arthur stood near the back with that folded newspaper still in his pocket, a quiet lighthouse. Dorian hovered beside Isolde, torn between pride and caution. Vera brushed a thread from Selene's shoulder and whispered. Selene's mouth flicked into a smile that never reached her eyes. I have lived long enough to know when a room is deciding who is safe to applaud. It decided, and then revised eddies of approval, swirling, thinning. Polite claps faded, replaced by a restless hush that felt like winter coming down the hall. Selene lifted her glass for a flourish. The band punched a bright chord. Cue the cheer. But the room hesitated. A table near Arthur filled with 2 retired engineers, and their wives began to clap for me instead, small, sincere bursts that sounded like truth modestly dressed. The applause split like a river forced around rock. I watched the fork form and felt a warmth I didn't wear on my face. Selene's jaw tightened. She lifted the microphone closer as if volume could erase doubt. "Let us focus on the couple," she said, sugar bright. "Let us honor the future rather than dwell on the complicated past." I pressed my palm flat on the tablecloth and steadied the tremor that wanted to speak for me before I chose my own words. The green-shawled woman drew a breath as if to say something, then exhaled into silence. I waited patient as a tide under moonlight for the next wave to arrive. It arrived when a man I hadn't seen in years, an old client with hair gone to silver, rose from his chair near the front. He took the spare microphone from a stand, turned, and walked it to me with the careful ceremony of a person carrying a newborn. "Mrs. Rowan," he said, voice low, "if anyone should bless this family tonight, it's you." Selene went motionless, a statue mid-curtsy. The mic was unexpectedly heavy, the way truth is heavy when you've been asked to carry it in public. I stood slowly, feeling the spotlight tilt again, not from the rigging, but from belief. I thought of the scratched program in my handbag of Arthur's paper of years when payroll landed, because I argued and negotiated and refused to let craftsmen go unpaid. Selene took a half step toward me, then thought better of it. Her smile returned, lacquer uncracked. "Mother," she said, "perhaps keep it brief." I placed my free hand on the chair back to ground myself and decided brevity would not blunt what needed saying. I let the silence lengthen until the chandeliers seemed to tick. In that quiet, I could hear the old timbers of my life settling houses, designed bridges, consulted storms, ridden out with a checkbook and a spine. I looked to Dorian. He nodded, once young and earnest and trying to be brave. Isolde's fingers tightened on his sleeve. Arthur's eyes told me he knew the map we were walking now. A waiter froze mid-step tray, hovering as if a dropped flute might rewrite the evening in shards. "Thank you," I said at last, just 2 words, but they belonged to the man who'd handed me the mic to my grandson, who had not looked away, to the stranger who had nodded at pain. I let the thank you settle where cruelty had been nesting. Then I breathed again and felt my voice find its footing, not in anger but in memory, because memory kept the receipts. From the corner of my eye, I saw Celine measure the room and calculate the distance to the nearest interruption. She liked to win by itinerary. I preferred blueprints, which allow for load and stress, and where the weight really is. When I started in this city, I said I learned that steel remembers pressure. People do too. The band waited, and even the ice chose not to clink. I did not begin with blame. I began with breath. The microphone was cool in my hand. The ballroom, warm with perfume and heat and memory, stepped forward like an usher who knew my row. When Celine was 8, I said we rented a small duplex off Montrose. I drew plans at night on the kitchen table and poured coffee at dawn at the hospital cafeteria so she could keep her piano lessons. The band hushed itself. Even the ice held still in its buckets. On Tuesdays, she practiced scales while I learned the smell of disinfectant and success, the sting of both in the same morning. I saw 3 women in sequins lean toward one another, the way strangers lean when a story begins to hold them. I let the first memory do what memory does best, open a door you didn't know was locked. I described the second-hand upright we found on a classifieds page, the cracked key cover the way my daughter's feet barely reached the pedals. I promised her the world would not make her small, I said. I promised myself I would not let my girl be erased by people with bigger checks and louder rooms. A waiter froze halfway to our table, caught by the hush. Vera watched smiling the way a person smiles when they mistake a prayer for weakness. Celine kept her chin, high eyes glassy with calculation. Years later, I went on, we moved out of that duplex. I carried her trophies in a banker's box. I painted her new bedroom yellow so the morning would begin generous. I let the fabric turn, showing the seam. I worked so my daughter would never feel small enough to be erased. I built floors that didn't tilt under her. And yet here I am, a name scratched from a program by the hand I once held, crossing traffic. The line lifted from my throat like a bird that had waited in a dark box. Gasps rustled. A few guests looked down at their brochures as if ink could confess. Across the room, Vera shifted the way a statue shifts. In bad weather, almost then not at all. The applause that followed wasn't loud, it was careful. A couple near the bar clapped twice, then folded their hands. Others frowned, undecided polish or proof. I could feel the divide like a temperature seam, under a door, warm on one side, cool on the other. Dorian's eyes shone the way glass shines right before a chip spreads. Isolde touched his sleeve, anchoring him. The peonies on the head table trembled in an air current I could not feel. The room felt like a courtroom, without oaths, judges everywhere, verdicts forming in whispers. Celine moved. "This isn't the time or the place," she announced, velvet stretched thin, stepping toward me with the poise crisis managers, practice in mirrors. Vera flanked her bracelets ringing. She reached for the microphone. Before her fingers touched the metal, a voice from the second row, steady, older, said, "Let her finish." It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The sentence crossed the room like a latch sliding home. Celine stopped. Authority so recently choreographed lost its footing. I kept breathing and let silence do the heavy lifting. When I was 30, I said I signed my first commercial contract on a copier lid because nobody had a proper table. Our foreman had been let go that morning. We paid him from our own account so the crew could finish and the families could eat. I let that picture sit beside the glittering glassware. Love is not a toast. It's payroll met and promises kept. It is a grandchild who thinks the sun rises because people older than him held it up before dawn. Arthur nodded from the edge like a lighthouse built out of bone and experience. Someone coughed. A chair leg scraped. My voice found an easier key. I came here for love, not recognition. But love cannot thrive where truth is buried under polish. I set the microphone down an inch, not a victory, but a setting down. I looked first at my grandson. His nod was small and firm, an oath in miniature. Arthur's newspaper, folded stubborn, glowed in his pocket like a banked coal. The waiter who had once taken my champagne paused, made a space around me, a quiet apology, measured in inches. My heart steadied. I placed the microphone back on its rest. That's all I said. Thank you. A laugh answered me. Porcelain on porcelain. It was Celine's laugh, the brittle kind a person uses when fear trips the wire that holds their poise. Guests startled. Vera patted her arm, the gesture of a seamstress trying to hold silk together with 2 fingers. The laugh thinned to a wire and then snapped. Adorable, Celine said, voice bright enough to sting. A bedtime story for adults. Mother, you always did love theatrics. She turned to the MC. We'll return to the schedule. But schedules are suggestions when truth's clock strikes. Heads pivoted to me, then to Arthur, then to the stand where the program's neat bullets suddenly looked like buckshot. The band did not play. The chandeliers hummed. I folded my hands and let the room choose whether it preferred polish or backbone. Near the doors, a phone camera lifted and lowered, as if its owner remembered that some moments deserve eyes, not lenses. I heard cutlery settle like a flock, deciding where to land. Celine's smile reassembled itself, and for a breath the evening pretended to return to plan. Then she laughed again, too sharp to be joy, and the sound cut the air like glass on marble. The night shifted from whispers to open war. In my chest, a quiet thing stood up and would not sit again. Celine's laugh cracked across the ballroom like breaking glass, sharp and brittle, too thin to be mistaken for joy. For a moment, no one knew whether to join in or look away. I kept my hands folded on the table, my glass steady before me. The laughter wasn't mine to answer. I let it echo, then die in the chandeliers. My silence was deliberate, and that choice held me in place even as my stomach twisted. At the back of the ballroom near the double doors, I noticed a stir among the hotel staff. 2 attendants exchanged a glance, one stepping aside as though bracing for something unplanned. A rustle cut through the hush that followed Selena's laugh. Heads turned toward the doors. I stayed still, though my breath quickened. I had the strange feeling that my night was about to turn. The doors opened. A man entered taller than I remembered. Though age had bowed his shoulders. His hair was silver now, his gait deliberate but firm. In his right hand he carried a slim black case, polished but worn at the edges. My pulse jumped, my throat tightening as recognition struck. Blaine, my old partner. The one name I never expected to hear aloud again, much less to see walking across the Lancasters' marble floor toward me. The room shifted instantly. Guests leaned back in their chairs, watching this older man with the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to demand attention. His presence carried it. He looked first at me. Our eyes locked, and for the first time that evening, I felt the ground beneath my feet. He nodded, not with pity, but acknowledgement. To Arthur, he tipped his chin, then turned politely to the master of ceremonies. No theatrics, no wasted words. He had not come for drama. He'd come for purpose. He set the case on the head table with a soft click. My daughter's smirk slipped a fraction. Blaine opened the latch, pulling out a stack of documents bound with neat ribbon. His voice carried steady and clear, board minutes, certified, vendor ledgers, payroll stubs, share certificates. He placed them one by one in the host's hands, then added, each notarized, each dated, each bearing Claudine's signature. Gasps rippled through the room. Paper did not lie the way whispers could. Seals, dates, signatures, things that could be checked, verified, confirmed. The MC's hand trembled as he passed the first sheaf to the hotel manager. A murmur began to build, the kind that doesn't stop once started. I sat straighter, not smiling, not weeping, simply breathing. Selene rose sharply. Forgery! She snapped, her voice carrying across the tables. Her eyes burned as though Blaine himself had committed a crime. Ancient papers mean nothing. Who even controls them now? Anyone could have fabricated. She faltered. Her words tumbled too quickly, too defensive, as if even she heard the cracks beneath them. Vera leaned forward with icy composure, her hand brushing Celine's arm. "This is not the venue," she said, her tone a blade wrapped in silk. She cast a cold glance toward Blaine. "Dragging business files into a family celebration, it's inappropriate." Blaine did not flinch. He stood calmly adjusting his glasses. "These are not rumors. They are registered. I can call the registrar tonight. You may FaceTime the archivist if you doubt the seals." His voice did not rise. It didn't need to. Authority lay in facts, not volume. Guests stirred. Some edged closer to the head table, eyes skimming the documents as if hungry for proof. Others drew nearer to Celine, their loyalty bending toward position rather than truth. Dorian's face changed, stiffening with recognition. His fiancée touched his arm, her eyes pleading but steady. Arthur spoke quietly to those beside him, nodding toward dates and signatures he remembered. A cluster of certainty began to form like small stones, building into a wall. I had not moved. My hand rested lightly on the tablecloth fingertips, brushing the linen's weave. At last I spoke once, only once. "The truth isn't loud. It's dated, signed, and witnessed." My voice carried not by force, but by stillness. I did not argue with my daughter. I looked at the papers, then at the faces turning toward me, and finally back to my glass. I sat down. My silence left the room to absorb the evidence without me demanding it. That was my choice to let the documents, the witnesses, the undeniable ink, carry more weight than any quarrel ever could. Celine's smile collapsed. The next words she tried to form tangled in her throat. Her laugh had cracked like glass minutes before, but now it was her composure that fractured. And this time I would not be the one picking up the shards. Blaine reached into the case again, lifting one last envelope thicker than the rest. His eyes scanned the room as he asked May we dim the lights. The ballroom fell into held breath. The lights dimmed so suddenly that a ripple of surprise moved through the room. The chandeliers overhead faded to a soft glow, and in their place came the hum of the projector as it flickered to life against the tall white screen set up near the bandstand. A title card appeared in crisp plain font, "Founding Records Internal Archive." The words were stark official without flourish. No one spoke. A room that only minutes ago had echoed with champagne laughter and murmured gossip was now hushed, caught between curiosity and unease. I folded my hands tightly in my lap, willing myself to breathe evenly. The hush pressed in on me, heavy as the dark. Blaine stood a few feet to the side of the screen, not in the spotlight, not demanding attention. That was the first strike of power. He didn't posture. He didn't plead. He let the evidence glow brighter than any speech. I watched his profile, silver hair, neatly combed jaw, firm eyes steady on the guests, not on me. He had come not to defend me with words, but to reveal what had always been mine by right. The first slide rolled across the screen, dated in black ink, the year sharp and undeniable. Board minutes with my name written clearly, Claudine Morley, co-founder. A rustle swept the room, followed by gasps from corners where people craned to see. The next slide showed vendor invoices, each signed in my careful script. I felt my spine lengthen as if years of humiliation had been chiseling me shorter, and now every signature restored the height I had lost. City permits appeared stamped with my architect's seal, the same seal I had paid extra to register properly so no one could question its authenticity. Then payroll ledger's lines of names I had insured were paid during leaner years, my initials beside every shortfall covered from my own account. Each slide carried a QR code in the corner, and I noticed the hotel manager lift his phone, scanning one quickly. A faint beep, a pause, then a nod as he confirmed what the screen already screamed: authentic, verified beyond spin. Guests began whispering in sharper tones, no longer murmurs of idle gossip, but reactions tinged with disbelief. Some even leaned forward to take photos, zooming in on my name, my seal, my proof. The power of the paper was not in drama, but in fact, and the facts were stacking like bricks against Selene's polished wall of denial. That was when Vera stepped forward, her presence deliberate and sharp. Her voice was velvet dipped in acid. "Receipts are easy to keep," she said sweetly, "but families are expensive. Some of us kept the lights on when others could not." Her tone was not raised, but every word was barbed, pointed toward me like a dagger disguised as etiquette. I didn't rise. I didn't move. I kept my eyes on the screen. Blaine, calm as ever, flicked to the next slide without a word. There appeared the cold print of my personal wire transfers, months of them showing where I had emptied savings to pay contractors during a crisis year. No commentary was needed. The numbers shouted what my lips never had. Vera's chin lifted, and in that gesture, she signaled her click. Several women pivoted deliberately in their chairs, angling their shoulders away from me, the act so rehearsed it looked choreographed. A dismissal meant to sting more than words. For a second, heat pricked my cheeks, but then the next slide froze them mid-gesture. It was an email chain. Selena's name at the top. Her request typed cold and professional update programs, remove C's name for optics. The date was recent. The words were not an accident. A sharp intake of breath echoed across the room. Somewhere in the dark, a champagne flute slipped from someone's hand and shattered. Dorian half rose from his seat, then froze, Isolde clutching his wrist to keep him still. The hotel manager cleared his throat, the sound trembling with the weight of responsibility. "I scanned multiple codes," he said, voice carrying. All returned valid from the registrar's archive. The silence that followed was not peace, it was judgment forming. I rose slowly, my hand steady on the back of my chair. I spoke once, only once. "Dignity doesn't need your permission, only your honesty." My voice was quiet, but the line hung suspended, ringing louder than any insult Selena had thrown. I sat again, smoothing my dress with calm precision. No more explanation, no more defense. The words were enough. Arthur began a small clap, a simple rhythm. A pocket of applause grew near him, hesitant at first, then bolder before faltering again. The room was not unified, some still clung to Selene. Others leaned toward me. The fracture was visible now, and it no longer belonged to whispers. The house lights lifted back to full brightness. Vera's chin remained high, but her eyes betrayed the dart of fear. Selena's smile stretched thin, brittle as glass. She leaned toward the MC, whispering quickly, then pulled back, realizing every move now drew eyes. I straightened the program in front of me, smoothing the paper that still bore my name, scratched out. Tonight it no longer felt like a wound. It felt like evidence. And then from the opposite side of the room, a woman I once mentored stepped forward. Her heels clicked against the ballroom floor as she reached for the microphone. Melis rose from the back row with a quiet determination that carried further than any thunderous announcement. Her heels clicked against the ballroom floor, a sound that cut through the hush left behind by the projector's glow. The microphone was passed to her by a tentative hand, and when she lifted it, her voice was calm but steady. "I wouldn't be here tonight if not for Claudine. For a heartbeat, I couldn't breathe." Melis, my mentee from so long ago, now stood between me and the crowd, reminding me of a bond I had nearly forgotten. She wore professional attire, tailored but simple, the kind that spoke of a woman who had fought for every place she now occupied. I remembered late nights at the firm, walking her through blueprints while others whispered doubts behind her back. Back then, it had felt like a small kindness, an obligation even. But now, as her words spilled into the room, they grew into something larger. Pride swelled in me, mixing with shock. I was a junior then, she continued, and my reputation was on the line. Some tried to cut me out of projects, erase my work, and bury me before I began. But Claudine stood behind me. She told me, truth outlives spin. She shielded me, and I survived because of her. The ballroom, which only minutes ago had bristled with tension, softened with her testimony. Guests who had sat with stiff expressions leaned forward now, some even nodding as though they had been waiting for another perspective. Gratitude colored her voice, and it painted me not as the disgrace Selene had branded, but as a mentor and protector. Then Melis reached into her bag, drawing out a thin folder that looked worn edges, softened by time but still intact. She held it up for the room to see before pressing it against her chest. "She gave me this years ago," she said, her tone firm. "She told me to keep it in case the day came when truth mattered more than appearances." She opened the folder, revealing line items of checks written from my personal account loans. I had extended payroll records signed in my hand. Gasps broke across the room. The faint clicks of phone cameras punctuated the air as people documented every exposed page. My daughter's face drained of color, her polished smile faltering as the reality settled in. The fourth page brought the loudest gasp yet. A highlighted memo, its ink slightly faded, but legible, and instructions signed by Selene herself. The words were clinical streamline branding, by removing C's name. The weight of that line pressed against the air until whispers burst into outrage. A woman near the front row muttered audibly, "She did this to her own mother." Dorian buried his face in his hands, his shoulders trembling. Beside him, Isolde's hand clung to his arm, her eyes cast downward. Vera stiffened in her seat, eyes darting towards Selene, as though calculating whether to stand or to distance herself. I did not rise fully. Instead, I leaned slightly forward, shaking my head not at Melis, who had chosen this moment with courage, but at Selene, who could not escape the ink of her own signature. I did not need to speak. The ledger spoke louder than any words I could craft. The voice of my mentee, amplified by truth, carried more weight than my protests ever could. Guests began to exchange looks, disbelief at Selene, then anger, then pity. Not the degrading pity that weakens, but a sorrow that acknowledged what had been taken from me. For the first time that night, the eyes in the room turned toward me, not in judgment, but in acknowledgement. Melis closed the folder and stepped to my side. She placed it gently into my hands, and I tucked it into my tote. The gesture was quiet, almost maternal in its tenderness, though she was decades younger. Selene opened her mouth to speak, but no words formed. Her lips moved, her jaw clenched, but nothing emerged that could undo the weight of her own pen. The silence that followed was not empty. It was loaded, a silence that settled on every shoulder in that room. And then, from the very back row, another figure rose. My son-in-law. His face unreadable, his steps deliberate. The microphone had not yet cooled from Melis's grip when he reached for it, and then someone I never expected stood up from the back row, my own son-in-law. The ballroom air was heavy, as if every chandelier had dropped its light, not in brilliance, but in judgment. I sat still, my hands folded neatly, when my son-in-law rose from the back row. His tie was askew, his shoulders hunched, his eyes shadowed with the look of a man cornered. He cleared his throat, the sound echoing louder than intended. "I can't." His voice faltered, then steadied. "I can't keep this secret anymore." A ripple moved through the guests who had not yet left. Chairs creaked as people leaned closer. Selene's head snapped toward him, her eyes like blades. I signed things I didn't want to sign. He admitted, his hands trembling. She made me. Forged drafts. Pressured me into approving deletions, emails, names, all of it. It was Selene's idea, not mine. The gasp that followed was collective, an audible exhale of disgust. I didn't flinch, though my chest ached. My daughter turned on him with venom. "You coward, you spineless." Her words dissolved under the weight of the crowd's judgment. No one laughed, no one pitied. The air itself had shifted against her. I thought of the years they had been married, the dinners, the vacations, the staged photographs of family unity, all scaffolding built on coercion. My son-in-law sank back into his seat, pale and broken, but the damage was done. Selene's foundation had cracked in public. Blaine, steady as ever, stepped forward. His leather case was now empty, but his voice carried with quiet finality. "Before I came tonight, I filed the necessary motions," he said. His tone was almost gentle, though the words bore sharp edges. "The registrar has reinstated Claudine's rightful co-ownership. All accounts tied to unauthorized removals are frozen until further notice." The murmur that spread was electric. Guests shifted in their chairs, some whispering, others shaking their heads. The program Selene had curated with such precision had unraveled thread by thread. Blaine didn't gloat. He simply announced truth, placing it before the room like a sealed verdict. Vera tried to recover, smoothing her gown with trembling hands. "Legal filings are one thing," she murmured. "Family is another." Her attempt at poise faltered when no one agreed aloud. The silence told her she had no ground left to claim. Selene, cornered, turned back toward me. For the first time all evening, she looked not like a strategist, but like a child caught in her own lie. But I didn't rise to meet her. I stayed seated, letting Blaine's declaration speak in place of my own exhaustion. It was Dorian who stood next, my grandson whose engagement we were meant to be celebrating, whose smile had dimmed under the weight of his mother's plotting. He trembled, but kept his chin high. His fiancée Isolde held his arm, her support quiet but visible. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking, "I can't. I won't stand by you if this is who you choose to be." The words were not shouted. They were plain, unpolished trembling, and yet they landed like thunder. His eyes glistened. "You told me family comes before everything, but you've shown me what betrayal looks like. I won't inherit that." Celine's lips parted in disbelief, but no sound emerged. For a flicker, I saw the girl she once was, the child who clung to my hand at piano recitals, who beamed when I clapped the loudest. And then the image was gone, replaced by the woman who had turned my name into a weapon against me. Guests rose discreetly, collecting coats and purses. The gala dissolved not in celebration, but in scandal. Vera tried to corral a few supporters, but even she knew the tide had turned. The family was no longer split by rumor, but by truth, and truth was heavier than silk gowns or wine-fueled smiles. I stood then for the first time with purpose. I walked to the podium, every step deliberate. I did not come to humiliate, but neither would I leave erased. "My silence tonight," I said, my voice calm, "was not weakness, it was weight. And tonight you have seen what silence can carry when truth finally arrives to meet it." The room stilled. Even those on their way to the doors paused. "I came here for love," I continued, "not recognition, not applause. But love cannot grow where deception is planted, and dignity does not ask your permission, it asks only for honesty." A few nodded. One guest dabbed her eyes. The applause that followed was uneven, tentative, but real. I didn't linger to hear it swell. I left the podium on my own terms, spine straight, heart lighter than it had been in years. The next morning my home was quiet except for the smell of coffee and the soft clink of plates. Blaine sat across from me, his presence a reminder of roots that could not be severed by signatures scratched from a program. Dorian and Isolde joined us, their hands intertwined, both still processing but present. We spoke not of the gala's humiliation, but of what came next. Legal work, yes, but more importantly, how to rebuild bonds without Celine's shadow looming. There was pain in Dorian's eyes, but also a new kind of clarity. I poured coffee into his mug, the steam curling upward. "Motherhood," I said softly, "is not defined by those who erase us. It's defined by the truth we carry and by the family who chooses to remember." Outside, the Texas sun rose golden and unyielding. For the first time in years, the clan name rested on my shoulders, not as disgrace, but as honor finally restored. Looking back on everything I lived through, I've learned that silence is not surrender. It can be a shield until the truth finds its moment. As mothers, grandmothers, and wives, we carry more than names. We carry the weight of sacrifice, the proof of who we are, and no one has the right to erase that. My story is just one reminder that dignity comes when we stand firm without bitterness, when we let truth speak louder than anger. But what about you? Have you ever felt overlooked by the very people you gave everything to? How did you choose to respond, with silence or with words? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If this story touched your heart, type 1 below or let me know where you're watching from. And if it didn't resonate, tell me why your voice matters here. If you want more stories like this, filled with lessons, resilience, and the power of family, please hit the subscribe button so you never miss the next chapter. Together, let's keep these conversations alive.